Good morning and welcome. We are delighted to have you join us for today's session of Global Conversations. The theme for today's conversation is Middle East, and we will have an opportunity to hear about some fascinating work happening in the region, as well as explore some opportunities for engaging there. I would like to take a moment to thank our co-sponsors for today's program: UW-Cal's Study Abroad Office, UW's Institute for Regional and International Studies National Resource Center, and UW's Middle East Studies Program. And a big thank you to our speakers for sharing their time with us. My name is Julia Frangel. I am the CALS Global Research and Partnerships Coordinator and your host today. Our office facilitates and supports international engagement for faculty, staff, postdocs, and graduate students, as well as cultivates international partnerships and hosts visitors. To kick us off, we will have the opportunity to learn a bit more about the region and the Middle East Studies Program. Following this introduction, we will hear from several speakers who will share their work and experiences with us. I will introduce each speaker prior to their talk. Please feel free to put questions in the chat, and if time allows, we'll take them at the end. Following the speakers, we will have an opportunity to hear about a variety of ways to get involved in the Middle East. This information and other materials from today's conversation will be emailed to all registered participants. Please note the session is being recorded. Without further ado, allow me to introduce Dr. Stephen Brooke. Dr. Brooke is an associate professor in the Department of Political Science at UW-Madison and the faculty director of the Middle East Studies Program. He is also a faculty fellow at the Association for Analytic Learning about Islam and Muslim Societies. His major area of research is religion and politics, with a special emphasis on Islamist movements in the contemporary Middle East. His award-winning first book, Winning Hearts and Votes: Social Services and the Islamist Political Advantage, was published in 2019, and his work has also appeared in the American Political Science Review, the American Journal of Political Science, and the British Journal of Middle Eastern Studies, among others. At UW-Madison, he regularly teaches classes on comparative politics, Middle East politics, Islam and politics, non-democracies, and religion and politics. And with that, Stephen, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you very much, Julia, for having me in this very kind invitation. And it's great to see everyone. I hope kind of your end of the semesters are all kind of going smoothly and that you're kind of looking forward to your winter break. I just want to check, can everybody see my screen? All good? Okay, excellent. So I'm just going to give a little bit of a brief overview to Middle East Studies at UW-Madison, particularly from my perspective as the faculty director of the Middle Eastern Studies program, and just kind of with a goal of kind of introducing you to some of the resources and opportunities that our center provides, and it may be a way for y'all to get in touch with us or to become involved in some of the things that we do. So just as kind of a brief introduction, right? We kind of tend to think of the Middle East as this region of the world, going kind of from Morocco or the Western Sahara on the Atlantic coast, maybe over to Iran and the Gulf countries there. But it's kind of a strange concept, honestly, to kind of this idea of the Middle East. And you will often hear people start to swap in other terms sometimes, right? And so you will, for instance, hear people talk about the Muslim world. And in many ways, that does kind of describe the Middle East in very general terms, but it's also not entirely correct. And just to kind of give you a sense of maybe why that might be so, right, we can actually see here that actually the Muslim world is probably South and Southeast Asia, right? The largest Muslim population is in Indonesia. There are more Muslims in the Indian subcontinent, or about as many as in the entire Middle East. And even if we want to confine our attention to that region of the world, there's a pretty substantial minority population that is not Muslim, right? And so this construct of thinking of the Muslim world may not be exactly kind of what we're trying to get at either, right? So the Middle East might be bad, or might be kind of confusing for some reasons, but we can also kind of look at other ways to describe the region and maybe get a little window into the diversity. Other people might describe it as the Arab world, right? And kind of the idea is Arab being a type of ethnicity, somebody whose kind of mother tongue is Arabic, the Arabic language. And in some senses, that's correct, but also there are a number of non-Arab minorities in the region, right? And so we might think of Turks in Turkey, we might think of Iranians, Kurds, Amazigh, or Berber populations, right? So we can kind of identify a large number of minorities that wouldn't fit inside kind of this category either. So the point is just to kind of think about this as a construct that is in many ways kind of made up, but kind of looking at alternative ways to describe this region also really, I think, does a great job of kind of highlighting the diversity of it and kind of giving us a little insight into kind of just how interesting it is and how many things there are about this region that might attract our interest. And you can really see that kind of reflected in the Middle Eastern Studies program here at UW-Madison. And the way that we kind of think about it, we have around 50 what we call kind of core and affiliate faculty members, and these stretch across kind of 24 academic disciplines. For instance, my home in political science. We have colleagues that are in history. We have colleagues that are in art history. I'm giving you just a sense of some of the ideas of courses that we offer, right? So if you're interested in this or any of these kind of courses kind of pique your interest a little, this would be the place to kind of come check them out. We have about 30 students in our certificate program. These are students that have kind of formally declared. So there are others who are, even if you may not know it, you're kind of like much of the way to getting that certificate already. But in addition to just getting that certificate, there's a number of opportunities that we have, right? We have these scholarships for language study and study abroad. These include kind of the well-known FLAS and CLS, the foreign language and area studies, or the critical language scholarships. These are all great opportunities for you to kind of learn the language. You can learn it here, you can learn it overseas. We have a lot of kind of other options on the website that may be a little bit more or a little bit less well known, but they might also be interesting to you. Another thing, particularly for kind of the students, both undergraduate and graduate, we offer cash prizes for seminar papers. So if you've written a seminar paper about some aspect of the Middle East and you or your instructor thinks that it's kind of particularly well done, you can submit it to us, and we have a committee that we put together of faculty members, and we read your papers and we decide what the best ones are, and we award prizes. And so you get a nice little line on your CV. You also get some cold hard cash. And we've also started up a student ambassador program, or kind of restarted it post-COVID, where this is a way for us to kind of tap into kind of the expertise and interests of our students here at UW-Madison, who kind of may have taken kind of a number of classes about the region, may have some exposure to traveling there or the languages, and can kind of take that experience and put it into kind of local schools and local community organizations who might be interested in, having a speaker who can talk about the region to their membership. So our certificate is, effectively a minor, and just if you're interested, I'll kind of run through briefly what it is, and you can always send me an email if there's something more you'd like to discuss. So it's 18 credits. It's a core course, which is basically just an overview of the region. We would expect going through kind of a second semester of a Middle Eastern language. And here I'll just put in a plug for our colleagues at the UW-Madison Summer Language Institute, which is Medley. It used to be APTLI, A-P-T-L-I. It's now changed to M-E-D-L-I. It's really fantastic. They have a number of funding opportunities. You can knock out this language requirement in one summer, for instance. So if that's kind of space in your schedule might be holding you back, I definitely encourage you to check it out. We would also expect for the certificate, we have kind of 2 tracks on our website. You'll see history and social science, religion and culture, and you can choose kind of electives from those in addition to taking one of each tracks, and that will be your certificate. And I would say, from my perspective, the certificate is a really kind of nice thing. You can look at these course listings. There's a chance that, if you're in this presentation, you might already be kind of interested or in the orbit of Middle Eastern studies. So maybe there's some that you can check off already. It's also nice on the resume, kind of a little signal of your interest to like your potential employers or maybe to graduate school, that you've done a little bit more work in a particular area of the world. It kind of gives you a little bit of bona fides in that respect. But it's also just a really nice way to sample the really wide range of classes that we have here at UW-Madison. I would also say that one of our major events is this kind of monthly or maybe bi-weekly lecture series where we bring in just a variety of speakers, often external, sometimes internal, where they present kind of work in progress or things that are just published. And these are all kind of cross-disciplinary things. We have kind of sociologists, historians, political scientists, professors of literature and arts. It's very, very interesting, an opportunity to just come and listen to somebody who's doing really interesting work, talk a little bit more about it. And so you can check this out on our website, and you can also just kind of see our posters hanging around campus, and you might want to just mark it on your calendars. And I would just close by saying the point of this is just to kind of give you a little point of contact. If you're interested in the Middle East in any kind of dimension, check out our website, sign up for our various social media. You can send me an email and I'd be happy to kind of add you myself. It's just a great way to kind of be informed about what we have going on around campus. And with that, I will turn it over to our other speakers, but thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Stephen. That was a great introduction. Our next guest is Dr. K.G. Karthikeyan. Dr. Krishnapuram Karthikeyan is a professor of water quality engineering in the Department of Biological Systems Engineering. His bachelor's degree is in agricultural engineering, and his master's and PhD are in agricultural and biological engineering from Penn State. His research is focused on the development and assessment of management practices to minimize water quality impacts of agricultural and animal production activities and municipal wastewater disposal. His primary contributions are in 4 categories: environmental fate and transformation of nutrients and contaminants, identification of sediment and nutrient source areas, development of innovative waste treatment technologies, and application of hydrological and geochemical models. Dr. Karthikeyan has published over 75 articles and received over $9 million in competitive grant funding. He teaches courses on soil and water conservation, on-site wastewater treatment, watershed hydrology, and agricultural non-point source pollution. He spent 2.5 years as a visiting professor abroad with Carnegie Mellon, Qatar, which presented opportunities to work as a consultant for the Qatar Environment and Energy Research Institute and the Qatar National Food Security Program. Okay, KG, I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Julia, and thanks to Julia and Jennifer for this opportunity. And Steve, it was a very nice introduction to the area, and I really like the way you presented it. So that's really helpful and gives a nice context to our discussions as well. So I hope my audio is clear. So if you have any problems with that, please let me know. So I'm going to go to the slide view, or I think this should be fine. So when Jennifer contacted me a couple of months ago about this global conversation, I asked her what the format and the expectations are, and she indicated it'll be quite informal. So I did put together a bunch of slides, many more than what Stephen had, but I'll course through that pretty quickly, and I'll make sure that you still have some interest and you're not dozing off, though. So there's a lot of pictures and very few text slides, and honestly, I wanted to be pretty informal, though. And my main aim is basically to share the experience I had. I was fortunate to have that experience to spend. It started off as a sabbatical, but then it went on for 2.5 years. So I was very fortunate about 10 years ago. Fortunate in a sense that I kind of capitalized on the budget crisis we were having at that time after the 2008 market crash. So UW-Madison was happy to have me on a leave of absence for more than a year, where typically they resist to give a leave for more than a year. While my department was a little bit reluctant because they were not sure if I was going to come back, but I didn't have any problem at the administration level, though. So that was a nice timing and confluence of events, though. So I took advantage of that. And as Julia mentioned in that bio sketch, my stint there was with Carnegie Mellon University because they still have a satellite campus there in Qatar, and they wanted me to develop an engineering program, and I was the only engineering faculty there at that time. Um, so, with Stephen's introduction to the Middle East, and especially with the World Cup soccer going on right now, so I'm pretty sure a lot of you can point to where Qatar is. I actually couldn't. So in 2009, when Carnegie Mellon approached me and said, "Oh yeah, we have a satellite campus in Qatar," I was thinking like, "Oh, let me go find out. I know where Dubai is." So I was a little bit embarrassed, having spent born and brought up in India with a pretty good geographical knowledge. I couldn't pinpoint because it's not a very big country. So you really have to zoom in. But it has a nice, uh, actually a shape like a thumb. It kind of resembles a little bit like Wisconsin too in terms of its geographic outline. But it is a very affluent country, and it was at that time and probably still is the second richest country in the world in terms of the GDP. So I have given you some numbers here, GDP, and the number in parentheses is for the United States. So as you can see, it's a pretty resource rich country. And if you happen to catch some of the soccer games, especially when the US was still alive, you can see how grand the facilities are. Um, so what happened was they wanted to use their resources, and they were thinking ahead. So this was like a couple decades ago. So Qatar Foundation invited several universities to set their shop, and they had a campus called Education City. So Carnegie Mellon was part of that. Texas A&M had their engineering footprint there, and you had Cornell for as a medical school, and Northwestern for journalism, and so on. So you can clearly see how they had a very strategic vision to invite like different universities which are known for certain disciplines. Like Carnegie Mellon, especially, is known for the computer science. They're like top 3 in the world. So the Carnegie Mellon campus there is very well known for the computer science, but that region being not especially resource rich when it comes to water, Carnegie Mellon saw an opportunity to have like an engineering establishment or an engineering footprint. And I had some contacts at CMU here in Pittsburgh, and they approached me, and we made it work over there. And there have been some changes in how this entire entity is operating, and I can discuss a little bit more towards the end. But this HBKU is their local university, and they are focusing more on the research centers. I hope you can see my cursor. I'm moving it here. So they are focusing more on energy and environment, computational research, as well as biomedical type research. And that's the HBKU, which is relatively new. It wasn't even part when I was there from 2010 to 2012. And they have a big research funding agency called the Qatar National Research Foundation, that's modeled after NSF and NIH, which is able to make sure that researchers locally are able to establish some nice collaborations and have significant funding for their work, though. So we took advantage of that, and I had a tremendous experience there for, like I said, over 2.5 years, though. And this is just to give you some visuals. This is a Carnegie Mellon campus. As you can see, it looks pretty grand, very modern facilities. You can look at a close-up view of their Carnegie Mellon campus there. very nice facilities. And this is all inside one big enclosure, really modern at that time. And some of their AV and other capabilities were top notch. And actually, UW-Madison, we are catching up, I would say. So our newer facilities are good. Like if you go to like biochemistry, for example, 1120 biochemistry, where I go there, that's a really good lecture hall or a classroom. But where I am, my home department is in at 460 Henry Mall. We are catching up. We are not even close to where they are at in terms of their resources, though. And this again, another just to keep your attention engaged. This is how rich it looked inside, though. And they had significant amount of startup funds for research. So I was able to set up a lab. Um, so this is just a view of our lab and some of the equipment and research setup. There were, of course, some difficulties, especially when you don't have like a research establishment set up. However, they were so cooperative, and they wanted to make sure that researchers and academic people have top-notch facilities or have access to top-notch facilities. So there are, of course, some growing pains, like I mentioned, and difficulty in terms of attracting students. However, with the availability of resources, I didn't necessarily see that as an impediment. For me, more of an issue was being the only engineering faculty and trying to set up a program, but I still had like a really good PhD student um, who was able to successfully complete, and I had a technical support staff. So money was not an issue at all, and resources was not an issue. And a little bit about the Qatar National Research Foundation or research funds. They're modeled after NSF and NIH. They at that time they were giving $1 million grant for 3 years, funding up to like 100 projects a year. So that they had pretty good vision in terms of what kind of projects they want to fund. And then they had other seed initiatives for new investigators or promoting undergraduate research or having money to fast track if you have some state of the art or exceptional research projects. Though. And I was fortunate to get a couple of research grants in addition to my seed money. There was a little bit of a problem though, because UW-Madison, our IP protocols or our IP process is different. So I was trying to work with RSP and WARF to bring some of the money. But the problem is, I shouldn't say problem, but the issue is Qatar Foundation did not want to give up the IP, and UW-Madison doesn't operate. So UW-Madison wants full control of the IP. So while I got a couple $1 million, I wasn't able to bring them to Madison. However, I benefited significantly from that because I was able to establish some research program on emerging contaminants that I was able to sustain for a decade after I came here. And I started that program while I was there, and I made some nice, good research collaborations during my time there. And I took advantage of that because they were promoting research to do desalination, and that was my exposure to the area of desalination. So it was a pretty enriching experience for me, both personally, in terms of being exposed to a new culture, as well as the ability to have a couple of new research programs as well. This QSTP, or Science and Technology Park, again, you can see that this is how it looks, and this is a real picture. It's not like a Photoshop one. And they had, like I said, very ambitious. So they brought in a lot of industrial partners like ExxonMobil, GE. They set their establishment in that Science and Technology Park, and the aim was for the universities and the commercial entities to have strong collaboration so that the academic research gets commercialized and vice versa. So as researchers, we can see what the industry wants and able to be able to respond in a timely fashion though. But like I said, Qatar wanted to have their own independent entities as well with the HBKU. So they are trying to have both, like development, both in terms of their indigenous or local work, as well as being able to have those commercial partners as well. And there are other programs in the Middle East as well. I didn't get a lot of time to spend with them, but I had a good opportunity to visit Coast in Saudi Arabia. I spent a couple of days for a conference. That was a really nice visit to be able to get exposed. Coast took a slightly different approach to what Qatar did. So within their university itself, they had tremendous amount of resources invested to have equipment, for example, and they had faculty as well as researchers participating on a lot of cutting edge research. So slightly different paradigm, but similar initiatives and goals. And Abu Dhabi at that point, a decade ago, was also getting involved in this. So it was really nice to see how the resources were being used to promote research that would benefit not only locally the Middle Eastern region, especially with problems with water and wastewater treatment, environment sustainability, but a lot of what you gain from those research activities are applicable worldwide. So you can even link them with the UN Millennium Goals, and you can link them with a lot of other pressing environmental, energy, and sustainability issues. So that's why it was a nice exposure, and it looks like they're still successful in terms of being able to maintain the research momentum as well as commercialization as well. So I know I went a little bit past the 10-minute mark, but I'm more than happy to answer any questions or discussion at the end. So thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, KG. It was great to hear and see more about Qatar after watching the World Cup the past few days. Our next guest is Reena Maali. Reena is a master's and PhD candidate in sociology and community and environmental sociology. Her previous research has included mapping the political donations of for-profit prison lobbying and assisting research projects related to improving the irrigation systems for farmers and introducing new sustainable practices to their work. Her broader areas of research interest include political sociology, social movement studies, race and ethnic studies, and environmental sociology. Today, she will be presenting her current ongoing project with environmental NGOs in the West Bank, Palestine.
Thank you, Julia, for that introduction. And I've really enjoyed this conversation so far, learning about the different research and funding opportunities that we have in the Middle East here in Wisconsin. So thank you for inviting me to this and to CALS for having these global conversations done every so often. So just to get started, as Julia said, I'm a PhD student in sociology and community environmental sociology. The work that I'm presenting today, Strategic Decisions in Environmental Framing, is my ongoing thesis project. So this is actually like a first peek at it. And this photo here that you'll see on the left is one of the activists in the study. He is from the Palestine Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability. And I'll explain that today, what he kind of does. And in this photo, you can see he is harvesting olives during the, ritual olive season in the fall. So my general areas of study, political sociology, specifically social movements and collective behavior, race and ethnicity, environmental sociology. And although I used mixed methods, I do focus on comparative historical sociological methods. The intersections of this project go over most of those, but as well, they cover professionalization and NGOization, which I will explain more in the next slide. And they also go through dynamics in strategic decision-making, as well as talking about the context of state building and neoliberal governance. So my research questions are concerned with how the motivations, frames, and decision-making strategies that environmental groups utilize are changed as civil society goes through reform or political upheaval. Frames, as I'm using them, are an analytic tool used to study the ways that activists make sense of their work and how they communicate their goals to others. Think of a window with wood framing the panel of glass. But in the study of collective action, the panel is the group's ideology, and the frame is what surrounds that and is viewed from the outside. My second question is, what consequences does the professionalization of an environmental organization have on working dynamics, project goals, and civilian activist relations with the local community? Previous research has found that a group of social movement activists undergoing institutionalization and professionalization of their work will experience limitations on their goals, tactics, and messaging. And here I have the definition for professionalization, which is a term from organizational sociology that explains the transformation of a movement for social change into a structured organization with a project plan, defined agenda, fixed budget, and hierarchical order of roles. When social scientists use NGOization instead, it is most often applied as a professionalization process that taps into a broader trend of new NGOs proliferating in the society. So broadly speaking, these questions are helping to answer how environmental activists adapt the way they promote and conduct their work in response to the changing politics around them. The first question, analyzing frames, is used to answer the how they adapt, while the second question, tracking the professionalization of an organization, can help answer what the changes they were responding to. So the case I selected is Palestine, which has one of the highest NGOs per capita, has been a top recipient of international charity and aid for over 4 decades now, and where most of the civil services like public schools, hospitals, community centers, and natural resource protection are all still run by NGOs. On the map, the red dots indicate where Jerusalem, Ramallah, and Bethlehem are, and these are the 3 locations where my NGO cases are situated. So since 1948, the context for this is that Palestine is a stateless territory. It is referred to as the occupied Palestinian territories. And this is important because I'm tracking this process of state building as one of the reforms in civil society. So from this era, from 1948 to 1987, the only civil institutions for schools, hospitals, and orphanages were run by charities and grassroots organizations. But following the devastation of the 1967 war, political parties, charities, and civil institutions emerged from the demands for grassroots collective action. Many of the left political parties institutionalized services such as hospitals, schools, labor co-ops, water management, and women's groups. And particularly from the late 1960s to the late 1980s, the institutions formed by the left political parties were regarded by most international NGOs and funders to be the locus of Palestinian civil society. In 1993, the Oslo's Declaration was signed with international approval to form an interim civil government in Palestine. And this is a governing body with limited sovereignty and still under military occupation that was supposed to be replaced after 5 years with a fully realized state of Palestine and a developed society. Originally called the Palestinian National Authority and was later changed to the Palestinian Authority and then later the State of Palestine. But as of 2022, a fully realized state has yet to be accomplished. So what does this have to do with environmental NGOs? Well, because I am looking at how environmental groups strategically make decisions for campaigns and how they talk about their work to different audiences, I hypothesize that during times of novel state building and political uprisings, that eco-activists will be pressured by the broader context to change how they approach these choices. And the state building process supersedes the creation of the Palestinian National Authority and provides its own conditional limitations that are unique to what we see after the creation of the civil governing body. And since 1994, the government has gone through multiple epochs of crisis. So 1994, the Palestinian National Authority was established, and this is known as the first major shift in Palestinian modern history. The NGOs who once managed all civil institutions and funds from donors now have a government they are subordinate to and must change their organizational structure to accommodate. In 2002, the second uprising in Palestinian history began, and it was one that was characterized by transnational organizations as violent and an illegitimate uprising. They also saw the uprising as a demonstration of the Palestinian failure to develop a state, since this was also beyond the 5-year plan established for the PNA. Then in 2007, a Hamas leader won the popular vote for prime minister, and the international community was outraged. So the ministers of the original Palestinian National Authority, who were appointed their jobs by the Western powers, disputed this win and appointed a new leader themselves, a politician representing a new neoliberal party in Palestine, calling themselves the Third Way, who launched a 4-year development plan that centered development, a firm control of security, and a market-based economic agenda. This launched a war between the West Bank and Gaza, and the development plan was criticized as aiming to isolate and weaken Gaza in compliance with American and Israeli desires. My thesis points to these 3 historical moments as informative to understanding shifts in Palestinian environmental politics over time, and more broadly can inform us about how activist groups strategize to adjust for drastically changing government conditions. Now about my cases. I am studying 3 organizations, 2 of which were started prior to the creation of the Palestinian National Authority, when they were part of that locus of Palestinian civil society and were run as subunits of political parties. Palestine Hydrology Group is an environmental group that was founded in 1987. They say that they are an independent, specialized institution dedicated to developing and protecting the water and environmental resources, and to ensure more public accessibility to adequate water supply and sources and sanitary conditions, and to develop proper information systems and technologies using GIS. The Applied Research Institute of Jerusalem is a research, advocacy, and activism organization that was founded in 1990. It was founded as a nonprofit dedicated to promoting sustainable development in the OPT and the self-reliance of the Palestinian people through greater control over their natural resources. And then my third case was founded much more recently in 2014, 10 years after the founding of the Palestinian National Authority. It began as a joint project between biologists, activists, and Bethlehem University, and its goals are to conduct research and knowledge dissemination on the fauna, flora, and human ethnography of Palestine. They promote environmental protection and responsible interaction between people and the environment, including cultural heritage, and they publish research results in areas such as biodiversity, history, culture, permaculture, and biological control to promote sustainable communities, focusing on more marginalized communities. Also, they are home to the first Palestine Museum of Natural History. So my methods for this project are primarily qualitative, with some basic frequencies calculated to aid in the content analysis. I also use semi-structured interviews with the NGO staff and volunteers to better understand how they see the relationship between their work and the changing politics and their decision-making process as well. But for the remainder of this presentation, I will not focus on my findings as they relate directly to framing analysis or professionalization. I want to instead share with you some of the work that these groups are doing today and how they fit that into their narratives. So this first organization, Palestine Hydrology Group, it was founded by these political activists, engineers, and scholars who came together to manage the problems of restricted water access and unclean water in the Palestinian territories. The group has also tried to address critical local and regional technical, economic, social, and political water resource management issues, and developed a multidisciplinary expertise to address such issues, and even more so to address stakeholder engagement processes in decision-making, as well as promoting their awareness and building their capacity. Some of the pictures you see here include a meeting for their Women's Water Network, a group of volunteers cleaning up trash at one of their Let's Protect It to Protect It events, a young boy accessing a water truck, a Palestine Hydrology Group staff person examining the irrigation lines on a farm in Jabara village, and one of their recent research publications titled Accountability and Rights in Managing Marij Sanor Watershed. The next group, Applied Research Institute of Jerusalem, founded in 1999 by scholars and political activists to achieve socioeconomic development through providing better access to food and better management and utilization of land, water, and natural resources. Their objective as a research institute is to disseminate information to Palestinian society. In the pictures here, you see workers distributing seeds for field crops and agricultural fertilizers, enough of them to plant 37 acres per farm on over 35 farms. There's also a photo of a woman's booth at the annual Olive Harvest Festival, done in cooperation with the Bethlehem Agricultural Directorate, the Bethlehem Rural Women's Development Association, among other groups. And in the corner photos, you see students and volunteers taking field trips to the natural areas and cleaning them up, picking up trash. Lastly, I have a page of their article about adopting new food production models in Palestine, and a list of their other subunits focusing on more political actions that they keep separate from this main organization. And then finally, I have the Palestine Institute for Biodiversity and Sustainability. It is a joint project between Bethlehem University biologists and environmental activists. Their goals extend beyond the biological research being done, and the Institute also houses the first natural history museum in Palestine. In some of these photos, you can see school groups on visits to the museum. On their grounds, also a museum of cultural heritage, a community garden, an aviary, olive and nut groves, and a pond that supplies water to the hydroponics gardens. You can see that their motto, vision, and mission express a strictly humanitarian frame on environmental work. So what I see so far about the changing frames and narratives is that narratives about the environment are changing and moving beyond frameworks of management and survival. In recent years, the organizations have incorporated narratives of justice, empowerment, and goals for improving their quality of life by addressing waste, food, deserts, restricted access to water, and the preservation of local parks and ecological sites. Organizations have also been successful in applying an intersectional lens to their work by addressing women's issues and inviting women to be staff or leaders in the organization. This photo on the left here, you'll see, is also part of the Palestine Institute of Biodiversity and Sustainability / the museum grounds. So I wanted to end this with some contact information for each of the groups in case you're interested to keep up with their work. The websites are listed here, and they're also all present on Facebook. Most of their publications and posts are in English as well as in Arabic. And I wanted to thank you all again for inviting me into this conversation. I've really enjoyed it so far, and I hope that you've learned something from me as much as I've learned from the presenters so far. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reena, for that first peek into your work. Such an important topic, and I'm excited to hear more about your results in the future. Our next guest is Dr. Jennifer Kushner. Jennifer is the director of CALS Global at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where she leads and supports international engagement in agriculture and the life sciences. Prior to joining CALS, she was a state specialist with the University of Wisconsin Extension from 2007 to 2018. For the past 30 years, she has led and evaluated US-based and global initiatives related to agriculture, the environment, and health. She specializes in systems approaches to complex issues with focused work in water. She holds a bachelor's degree in agricultural sciences and a master's degree in adult education from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and a doctorate in adult education from National Louis University. Dr. Kushner is a member of APLU's International Committee on Organization and Policy's Executive Committee and the Globalizing Extension Innovation Networks Council.
All right. Well, thank you all. And I think you'll see a theme here of water, which is clearly very important to this region. So I'm really delighted for the opportunity to actually share some of the work I've done in the Middle East, which focused on leading strategic planning for the core parties. So that's Palestine, Israel, and Jordan, related to water. The project took place over about a 2-year period with some ongoing coaching and mentoring. So for those unfamiliar with the geography, it looks like this. And we tend to focus on the nation states because there's so much conflict in the region, as we've already seen and heard. But in fact, there's also a very holistic and integrated perspective to take, particularly as we take a look from a natural perspective. So I'll give just a very brief historical background to this project and then launch into the project itself. So in 1991, the Middle East peace process, I believe, was sort of formally kicked off in Madrid. This was under President Bush Sr. And then in 1992, a multilateral Middle East conference took place in Moscow. At that meeting, there were 5 working groups that were generated, and one of those was focused on water. In 1994, a water working group known as the Regional Water Data Banks Project was formed. And in 1995, a Middle East multilateral working group on water resources was established to enhance cooperation between the core parties on water-related issues in the region. So this was not just coming out of water science. It was really a very interdisciplinary kind of strategy. The steering committee for that Middle East Multilateral Working Group on Water was known as the Executive Action Team, or EXACT, and it was comprised of representatives from the 3 core parties and from donor countries, which included the US, the EU, the UK, the Netherlands, Canada, Norway, France, and then later Japan and Italy. So at the outset of this effort, a broad training needs assessment was carried out by the core parties, so all 3 entities, trying to identify training needs that were shared across the region. And in 2005, the 3 core parties presented the idea for a regional water training initiative to EXACT, and the donors supported and expressed an interest in the idea. So a workshop was planned for 2007 to sort of identify and prioritize trilateral water resource training opportunities. In 2009, the group decided that they really felt like they needed a strategic plan, and that's where I come in. So we've already looked at the geopolitical boundaries, but just to kind of refresh where we're talking about here. So Jordan, Palestine, and Israel. All right, so I mentioned this was a 2-year project, and the first year there were 3 primary objectives. First one, to identify shared goals for the region related to sustainable water use and development, to develop a prioritized list of projects that address those shared goals, and to develop implementation plans for those prioritized projects. All right, in year 1, we met in Palestine, and the attendees from all 3 core parties included water professionals, ranging from government to science and academia to industry and NGOs, donors, and then the US sponsors. The primary activities included brainstorming multilateral projects based on themes, prioritizing those projects, and then developing implementation plans. So we used a variety of tools and processes that I created, and I'm happy to share more of those tools and those processes with anybody who's interested at a later date. But you can see here the themes that were the top hitters initially were domestic water use, ag water use, municipal water use, environment, and energy. The prioritization process included establishing criteria for prioritizing. So we had a tool for that, compiling those ideas, ranking using a decision matrix tool based on those criteria, and then prioritizing within those thematic areas. Then there was a tool and process to guide the development of plans that included identifying shared leadership, intended outcomes and deliverables, objectives, milestones, and dates, potential partners, and funding. All right, so what happened was that the themes got ended up getting sort of reworked in the process of that first year. As we looked at the projects that got generated, they really seem to group into some new themes. So you can see these new themes here, and then the specific projects then got bucketed into these and prioritized within these themes. So the themes are on the left, the topics are on the right. There's obviously some overlap between some of these, related to like desalination. Has a little bit of water treatment and a little bit of monitoring, but you can see they were identified in relation to specific themes. All right, so we left year one with plans and teams and goals and objectives and funding and a bunch of things in place. And we agreed to come back together in a year with a new set of objectives. So year two was really focused on stepping back and assessing the progress, monitoring, making course corrections, and then creating a vision and a strategy and support for the multilateral effort. So they were really focused on the multi or trilateral cooperation component of it. And year two work was hosted by Norway, which was one of the donors. It was in Oslo, very snowy and very cold and very beautiful. And those were really the guiding objectives for the gathering. So these were sort of intensive face-to-face times that we were together and I was facilitating this process. And then the core parties over the course of the year would go back out and do the work and we would have check-ins and monitoring throughout. So it was to assess the progress, to generate a vision for the next 3 years, and really a strategy to actualize that vision rather than just these sort of isolated projects. And then growing in importance was developing a plan or a strategy to support multilateral efforts. And from the very get-go, this group, like I said, it grew out of the Middle East peace process. So the catalyst in many ways was a recognition that water could potentially play a very key role to facilitating cooperation, not conflict in the region. All right, so the year two activities were really sort of distilled activities and deliverables, I guess we should say, were these: reflections, vision document, strategy, and donor engagement plan. These were the primary results or outcomes from the year two effort. We established a shared understanding of the progress that was being made. So not all those projects that we left year one with unfolded the way everybody had hoped. There was, oops, I think I skipped a slide. Nope. Okay. Created a vision statement document. They decided of their own accord to come up with operating principles that I won't read all of them now for the sake of time, but things like decision-making by consensus, or holding up EXACT as a symbol of cooperation across different venues. Being intentional about sharing data and developing common vocabulary and technology. So those were some of the operating principles. Developed a donor criteria framework for review of proposals, a prioritized project for donor engagement, and identification of issues for further discussion. The results from that year two sort of reflection process. Water scarcity remained really the central shared issue across the core parties, and a prioritization on desal and reuse being at the top of the list for focus, and that data sharing and knowledge were really kind of core and critical. They focused on some of the achievements that they had made and they wanted to build on. I won't read all of these now. Again, for the sake of time, you can see these in the slides that'll be posted. The vision, I think, really became important because they increasingly wanted to hold up this model as a platform for regional cooperation around water, but really hoping that it could bring in other dimensions of natural resources and natural resource management, and using that to enhance the peace process. And then really focusing on high impact issues in the implementation that had shared interest and shared necessity related to water scarcity and climate change. And I will just wrap up by saying that the work continues. It was really, I think, of regional importance, practical importance, and in some ways global significance. Because what really drew my attention to the project was the idea of water being fundamentally, it's unifying, it's necessary for all life, but also it can bring people together in some unique ways. So the last thing that I'll say is that it really, this project laid groundwork for me, which led to over 10 years of leading systems approaches to water work domestically in the US. And really that work focused on helping people think differently. So it wasn't fundamentally about improving the science, although that was a part of it, but it was really bringing people together to think differently around water. So with that, I will turn it back over to Julia, and I will stop sharing, and I will share a different screen.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. It was great to hear more about your work and just a great example of work within the region. We're running a little bit short on time, and we did have one question in the chat, but I'm going to make it public to everyone. If the speakers want to answer this in the chat, if they have time, that would be great. And I'm just gonna go ahead and finish up with giving you just showing you the contact information. Here's the question from Tierno. Oops. Where'd it go? Oh, so what are some of the main stumbling blocks to conducting business and education within the region without generalizing too much? And how can we help overcome them? Great question, Tierno. So Reena, KG, Jennifer, if you wanna answer that in the chat before we all have to get off. But I just wanted to say thank you to everyone for joining us today. I will send out this PowerPoint, and it has a list of different ways to get involved within the region, including grant opportunities, fellowships, volunteer opportunities, some newsletters to sign up for, and just a lot of events from the Middle East Studies program as well. And then the contact information for all of our speakers can be found on the last page. This is our last Global Conversations for the semester. We're really excited to let all of you know that there's some changes coming to the program format for the spring semester. So please watch out for announcements regarding the new design in the coming weeks. And yeah, have a great and happy holiday break. Thank you all for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.